Hey, listeners, today I actually have a guest who has been on my bucket list for a while, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Mary Marantz. Mary has just written a book that's about to be released, and it is called Underestimated the Surprisingly Simple Shift to Quit Playing Small, Name the Fear, and Move Forward Anyway. And she also is the author of the book Dirt, which, such a good book. So I highly recommend that. So that is one of the reasons that Mary has been on my bucket list because she has such a great story of overcoming. And she has also has a great podcast, The Mary Marantz Show. And I don't think I've ever missed an episode since I've been listening. So I'm one of those fans.
I
So
love that.
anyway, yeah, welcome to the podcast, Mary.
Oh my gosh, Carol, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that amazing introduction. And thank you for listening to every episode. That is commitment. That
Yeah,
is a
well,
lot of hours of me and other people that I have on the show in your earbuds. So that's a
yeah,
huge, as everybody listening to your show knows, like that's a really special place to be.
it
So
is.
I'm just
Yeah.
grateful. I'm so, so grateful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when you go on breaks, I'm like, "Ah, Mary,
Yeah.
where's my feed anymore?"
Come back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you have lots of great, interview guests and all that, but today we're here to talk about you. And just tell me, a little bit about you personally, like your husband and where you live and about the house that you live in, because I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, so currently, I live in New Haven, Connecticut, which is, I ended up coming here for law school. Kind of just real quick backstory, just to even catch us up to there. I
Yeah.
grew up in a single wide trailer in rural West Virginia. In the 1980s, my dad's a logger. My mom cleaned houses. She actually ends up leaving when I'm 9. And that becomes a big part of the story of Dirt. So, single wide trailer to Yale Law School and kind of going back home to make peace with your story, peace with your past, and people with the peace with the people who came before.
Yeah.
And I came to New Haven to go to Yale for law school and met my husband the summer after my first year of law school, my husband Justin. And we ended up staying here as soon as I graduated law school. We actually started a photography business full time together, which is a really expensive way of becoming a photographer. Don't recommend that route necessarily. But we had our photography business for 15 plus years and it turned into a photography education business. We got to speak and teach all over the world and photograph all over the world. And then in 2019, I signed a 5 book deal with my publisher to write books full time. And so this
I
is
didn't
book
know
3
that.
of 5. Yes, yeah, 5 of them. So there's Dirt, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, and now Underestimated. And Carol, you mentioned the house that we live in. It is we lovingly refer to it as our 1880s fixer upper by the sea because our very first house we ever got to buy as a married couple, and our still current house is on the water in Connecticut. Which, if you would have
Wow.
told us was even in the realm of possibility, we would have laughed. That doesn't happen. And what happened is that this was in the crash, the bottom of the market, 2009, following
Oh, yeah.
2008 housing market crisis, and this house had been in foreclosure, and the bank was not checking in on it, and a pipe on the third floor burst and flooded the whole house. The neighbors next door saw water coming out of the second floor window.
Oh my god.
So basement, first floor, second floor window. That's how much water was in the house. And they turned it off and let it drain, but they didn't do anything else to air it out or dry it out. And it sat through the summer heat and not surprisingly got mold and mildew. And so in this really fun twist of fate, I go from this trailer, this leaky shack of a trailer, in 1980s West Virginia that always reeked of mildew.
Uh-huh.
I said it, clung to my clothes and my very dignity, to God, who has a very amazing sense of humor, using this mildew smell in this house to open the door for us getting our dream house. So it was just a very
Wow.
redemptive, full circle moment in my story, but also just like a really like God really has a lot of fun with the details, a
You're
lot of
like,
fun
"Oh,
with how he
not
makes stuff
not
happen.
mildew again, God."
Yeah. Right.
Well, that's one thing, like, my passion is old houses and, architecture and all of that, so I
Right.
loved reading about that house, and I just love that you took something like that and made something beautiful out of it again.
Mm,
So, which is what I think God does with all of our stories if we'll give
that's
it
right.
to him. So,
That's
I
right.
love that. So, before we get into your story, I want to read from your recent book, Underestimated, one of the very last quotes of the book because I think it fits this podcast so well. And it says, "See, I have this very unscientific theory that pain, like progressively finer grits of sandpaper, rounds off the hard edges we're all born with and makes hard story people a safe, soft place to land for others. Because of this, the people with some mud in their stories are exactly the ones we need out there lighting up this world. But because of their kind, tender hearts, they can't believe their story will ever matter."
Hmm.
And when I first started this podcast, that is one of the reasons I started it because I knew people with very, very, very hard stories that had overcome a lot and God had worked in their lives in such amazing ways. And I wanted it to be an encouragement to the listeners. And I feel like I have just been able to share some amazing stories. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted your story on this podcast because I want you to go all the way back to West Virginia and tell the listener more about your story because you have, when you say a trailer, you know, a lot of people have this vision in their mind. My husband and I had a trailer mobile home when we
Hmm.
first got married. And our friends and family used to kid and call it the mobile mansion because it was, you know, this brand new trailer with a garden tub and all this kind of stuff. But this is not what you grew up in. So
No.
share with the listener exactly what your childhood was like.
Yeah, so when I say trailer, I mean single wide trailer. And when I say single wide trailer, I mean 19, like I think they bought it in like 78 or 79. Um, yeah, like a, true tin can of a trailer, that kind of like long, not even like the cool like Airstream kind of look, just
No.
like a single, giant tin can basically. And then the kind of cool thing to do at the time and in the area when you had a single wide trailer was you did an upgrade by building on sort of a lean-to one room addition, this sort of lean-to shack. And the one that we built, or that my parents built, was just sort of like, I don't even know where they got this wood. It was just like all sorts of scraps of mismatched wood. This was not even like lumber from Home Depot or whatever. It was,
Right.
the boards were all different sizes and, had cracks in them and like, you know, just, just they looked like they were just from like a pile of wood in the yard. And then that's how I remember it. I don't know where it actually came from, but and so because that, neither of these things, trailers in the late 70s, early 80s, and lean-tos, shacks made out of mismatched wood, neither of those things are built to last. And
Mhm.
so by the time I'm 4 or 5, the trailer and that room are already incredibly leaky.
Mm.
Um, I always kind of joke that my people are the people who know what ceiling drywall or whatever that material is looks like before it gives way in this kind of like pregnant pause swollen with water before it gives way in a downpour. And, the ceiling would leak every time it rained. It felt like it rained just as hard inside as it did out. And then the floor begins to crumble because the floor is just particle board, with this brown shag carpeting on it in the single wide trailer. And the trailer is up on like, I honestly, now that I kind of like even really describe it, it seems very perilous, but the trailer is up on probably like these pillars of cinder blocks stacked like, I don't know, 4, 6, 8 high, something like that. Like it was way off the ground.
And
Um,
probably no concrete to
no, no,
get
no,
it in.
no, no, not at
Okay, that's
all.
too much to ask. I know.
And so thank goodness we weren't really, I mean, I don't remember a tornado ever coming through
Oh,
West Virginia
yeah.
when I was growing up. They do now, but
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, so the particle board would start to crumble, and I kind of had to know exactly where to hopscotch when I left my bedroom through the trailer living room so that I didn't hit a just a spot of carpet that was supported by nothing, and you go all
Yeah.
the way through.
Oh my gosh.
And the carpet started to get really caked with mud from the mud my dad would track home as a logger. We also had just a revolving door of stray animals when I was growing up, and so they were never really trained to go outside to go to the bathroom. So cats and little dogs and everything that would just go right in that same carpet.
Oh my
We had
gosh.
mushrooms growing out of that carpet. We had every sort of imaginable bug and undesirable animal
Oh my
living in the
gosh.
trailer. And so, yeah, like I said, I mentioned earlier, like when you have those kind of conditions, like the whole place starts to smell like mildew, and it really does, that sort of sickly sweet smell of mildew. It clings to your clothes and your very dignity. And I talk in Dirt about going to school one day, and we had sort of like free periods where we could walk next door to the Dollar General. And my friend and I were there, and I was just like spraying dollar store vanilla perfume on to try to cover up the mildew, but it actually is just like a horrible combination of like sickly sweet vanilla and sickly sweet mildew. And I, to this day, cannot stand the smell of vanilla because of
Ah.
it. So, yeah, my dad was a logger, his dad was a logger, his grandfather was a logger and a coal miner. We actually go back in our family tree 8 generations. In the
Wow.
1800s, they were logging and pulling the logs down by horses. When my dad actually first started working in the woods, he was 12 and they were using horses still.
Wow.
And my mom, when she was 15, she came home from school one day and there was a note from her mom that said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself now. The rent is paid through the end of the month. There's some macaroni and tomatoes in the cabinet. Good luck." So they both came from very hard stories, and in their mind, a new trailer was like a major upgrade. And
Yeah.
I had stuffed animals for, we had really nice Christmases. Nice Christmases are a big deal in that area, I would say, or at least in our family. If you could have a nice Christmas, then whatever else happened the rest of the year was fine. And so, yeah, there was just, they were, neither of them had drug problems or alcohol problems. They were incredibly hardworking people. And so, Carol, what that kind of had taught me through writing Dirt and having conversations like this is that there's a lot of complexities to that word poverty, because I come from a very proud family, a very proud area. We would never straight up self-describe as living in poverty. My dad was the owner of the logging business. He had men who worked for him. So like in our community, people saw us as like very successful, even though, we came home to that trailer. And so I think like there are such things as like poverty of home. Some I never had this, but I had friends who had nice double wide trailers, but they had poverty of like food insecurity,
Mm.
poverty of parenting, poverty of love. None of those really did I struggle with except for the poverty of home. The home condition was pretty rough.
Mm.
And this whole kind of like, it set me off on this whole sort of quest, which I think you'll really resonate with, of like finding a real house, like a
Mm. Oh,
real
yeah.
home, like a home where we took care of things, and there was maintenance on things to keep up with them, and our animals went to the vet. These felt like really big accomplishments. To actually buy a house with a roof on it felt like a huge accomplishment.
I think that is, yeah, I haven't thought about that before, but having that insecurity as a child, I'm sure that is something that you aspired to have. And
Mm,
I guess it makes your book, resonate even more with me. And just so the listener knows, that is the cover. So I don't even think you described it as well as you could have as far as the photo, but it ended up
yeah,
being the photo on the cover of your book.
of Dirt. Yeah.
And yeah, so how did that come to be?
That photo was actually taken by Justin the first time I took him home to meet my family, and
Wow.
he went to school for photography, and I mentioned that earlier. We became photographers together, and so that's what he does. He sees the world in photos. And there's a reason, a photograph is worth 1,000 words. So
Oh,
as
yeah.
much as I describe it, the photo is even more shocking, probably.
Yeah.
And for your listeners, if you go to thebookdirt.com, there's actually a video where I went back in 2018 when we were getting ready to pitch to publishers, and we filmed a book trailer at the trailer,
Yeah.
and so you can actually see inside, which is pretty wild.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
gonna go back and look at that because
yeah.
the descriptions that you had were amazing, but there was one instance in particular that you described that I was so mortified. I was like, I think I would have to move out even though I was a child. I don't think I can go back home.
I think
Was
I know
when
where this is
you
going.
when you and your dad were watching television
Yeah.
and what you saw behind the television that
Yeah, we were just watching. If I remember correctly, we were watching The Honeymooners. That's how it's burned into my brain. And it's kind of like one of those things where you see movement and you feel like your brain is playing tricks on you, or
yeah.
your brain can't quite catch up to the the data that your
Yeah.
eyes are sending it. Yeah, no, it was just a big fat. I'm gonna say it was a wood snake. I'm gonna say this one in particular was not a rattlesnake. Maybe it was. Maybe it was.
Ah,
But it was a big old snake that came right over the top of our TV. And I got up and ran out, and my dad just kind of kept sitting there. And he said that it went sort of back in, and we never found it. We never found it. So it's not
oh
like we knew it
no,
was
no.
gone. No. Yeah. But there were plenty of times, Carol, when, one of my jobs was to stack wood and move wood closer. We would have multiple wood piles. So as one dwindled, we would move the stacks closer. Or like in the summer, there would be a lot of, prepping of all the piles to get ready for winter. And there were plenty of times when I remember one in particular, I moved a piece of wood and there was a rattlesnake right there.
Oh gosh.
Or they would just sometimes like curl up and die on the step right in the front
Uh-uh.
step.
No, uh-uh.
So when I talk about that now, it is wild because I promise you, your girl has lost some of that edge living in Connecticut for 20 years. If that happened now, I would just die. I would kill over and die.
Yeah, I would
Woo!
definitely die. So I have admiration that you survived that,
Yeah.
especially. So going back and talking through all that, you ended up going to Yale Law School,
Yeah.
which before you went to Yale, though, if I remember correctly, you went to England to
That's
study.
right.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So, how in the world did a girl that grew up in a situation, a home like that, end up being able to go to England and study? I would love to go to England one
Yeah.
day, and then end up at Yale. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. When Dirt was coming out, Dirt came out in 2020, and I was doing some interviews, specifically just for that book. It was the only one that existed then. I spent a lot of time kind of trying to trace the dominoes backwards. Like, what was the first domino that fell? And as far as I can go back to remember, so, one of the things you have to understand is that my mom and dad ended up buying the trailer because they were living with my grandparents. And that's not an ideal situation for
Right.
newlyweds. And my mom sort of gave my dad an ultimatum of like, we need to get our own place or I'm leaving. And this was only a couple years into being married. And they went and bought the trailer, but they had no land. So they just parked it on the back yard of my
Yeah.
grandparents' yard. So it's like, I don't know, 100 feet apart or whatever.
Yeah.
And so my dad saw me growing up in the same yard he grew up in. I was about to enroll in the same elementary school that he went to, was going to the same Sunday school that he went to when he was little. And he very quickly understood that if something didn't change, I was on the same trajectory that he was, which was pretty much, like, I mean, he didn't even want to finish high school. If he would have been left to his own devices, he would have just dropped out and started working in the woods full time.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he wanted to do.
Right.
And so when he had gone to kindergarten at that same New Hope Elementary kindergarten that I was about to start in, he had been called on in one of the early, first few days, and he didn't know the answer and he didn't feel prepared. And the kids all laughed. And for him, that one experience, this is just like, this kind of gets into underestimated and how, like, the labels we wear and the thoughts we have in our head can shape our whole existence. But that one experience told him that he was dumb, that he was a stupid person. He was not a good student. He would never be good at school. And so he just owned that his whole life. And so when I was going to kindergarten, the only thing he knew, the only thing that he felt equipped that he could do was to make sure that I went to kindergarten prepared. And so at the time, Carol, in the grocery stores in the 1980s, right by the racks when you would check out, they had these workbooks, a math track and a reading track. And I
Mhm.
can still remember the cover of them. It was like dot matrix printing where they would use like letters and numbers to create pictures. And it was
Uh-huh.
this little boy's face made out of like dollar signs and X's and whatever. And they made them for each grade. And so he got me the kindergarten reading and the kindergarten math. And we did that workbook. I did that workbook and he made sure that I had done it. He didn't necessarily feel like he could teach me what was in it, but he made sure I did it. And then when we finished that one, instead of just being like, okay, good, you're ready for kindergarten, he got me the first grade one. And then when that finished, we got the second grade and the third grade and the fourth grade. And by the time I started kindergarten, I was in a fifth grade math level and a sixth grade reading level.
Wow.
And when you go into a situation like that, talking about those labels, and you are that far prepared, that far advanced, you get labeled as smart
Mhm.
and gifted. And they wanted to skip me in some grades. And I am very thankful my parents didn't allow that because it meant that I kind of stayed ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
and continue to be labeled smart and put in like the gifted programs and such. And I believe in so many ways we rise and fall to the labels that are put on us. And
Yeah.
so those labels became like a lifeline of, maybe there's something more that's possible. And he was also always the voice in my head telling me that whatever happened, I was going to college. Like under threat of death, I was going to college. Because there was a part of him, even though he ironically would have dropped out to go work in the woods full time, he also always really regretted not going to college.
Mm.
And in 1960s, 1970s West Virginia, you only went to college really if you had money or a football scholarship, and he didn't have it, either of those. So yeah, I think it's something like that, and each one just sort of dominoed into the next. I did well in grade school. I did well in junior high. I got put in the gifted programs there, the advanced programs there, then in high school. And then when I went to college, I just sort of gave myself the challenge to try to get all A's the first semester because despite all of those labels and despite all that track record, I was convinced I was going to fail out because WVU is the biggest university in the state,
Wow.
22,000 students, and I
Oh
came
my
from a
goodness.
town of 2,000. So,
Yeah.
I was pretty convinced I was going to be 22,001. And so I was so afraid of failing, I sprinted towards success.
Mm.
And then that just kept dominoing into getting to go to England and then applying to law school.
Why did you decide law school and Yale?
The honest answer, the very first early seeds of wanting to be a lawyer are the People's Court and
Oh,
Perry
yeah.
Mason and Matlock, all of which I would watch with my grandma Goldie. I come from a generation where the TV sort of raised us. I don't
Yeah.
know if you felt that.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
latchkey kids.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. First generation where both parents were working.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just watch. Yeah, it was like 12 p.m. Matlock, 12:30 p.m. Perry Mason, 1 p.m. the People's Court. They were just one after another. And I would put on my grandma's Sunday school suits and pretend they were lawyer suits, and I would wear them while we watched the shows and pretend I was a lawyer. And somewhere in like my junior-ish year of high school, I became really convinced, that I would not do well at WVU. And that was the only university in the state that had a law program. And so in my brain, you went to undergrad where you were going to go to law school. I didn't know you could do one at one school and then apply somewhere else. I just did not realize that.
Mhm.
And so I thought I was going to fail out if I went to WVU. So I said, okay, law's off the table. And I was looking to go to a small community college for teaching. And then my senior year, I watched some really dumb movie about it was like Jeff Daniels and the guy who played Kramer, and they like had to pretend to be each other. And
Uh-huh.
it was a law movie. And then there was like My Cousin Vinny,
Oh,
and like
yeah. Now I do like that movie.
me too. We just watched that again a couple like weeks ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it just sort of reminded me like remember who you always wanted to be. And I think
Mm.
like that's a really silly story and it sounds so dumb to say it out loud. Like My Cousin Vinny convinced me to go to Yale Law. Like please don't make that the headline of this episode.
I won't. I
Um,
won't.
but it's also proof that like the smallest things, maybe this podcast episode for the people listening can remind you,
Mm.
remember who you wanted to be when you were little, before the world told you to doubt yourself and told you you're going to fail before you even try. And so at the last minute, I switched and WVU was the only school I applied to, and that's where I went.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you had a really close relationship with your grandma Goldie, right?
Mm-hmm. 5'2" and a towering force in our family tree. Goldie Bess. Yes, she was a hoot. She was a character. She loved me fiercely, and she was super good at slamming a door. She was a firecracker. And there's studies that have shown that if one adult will take an interest in a child, it can change the whole trajectory of
Mm.
their life. And my dad was working all the time. He was not home very often, and when he was home, he was exhausted and on the couch. But he took that interest in the workbooks, and then she took that interest in just like, you know, sort of when my mom wasn't around, she was kind of like a mom and a grandma.
Mhm.
And there were many times when like I could do no wrong in her eyes, and she saw um a giftedness or a specialness or like I was her only granddaughter until I was 22, and then she had another granddaughter. And so I think there's just like we could go deep here on like the Enneagram and like the masks we put on and who we think we have to be in order to be loved. But like as an Enneagram, now I realize for one of those masks, I think came from just having a grown up belief that I was really unique and special and there was a giftedness there and that I was, meant for big things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, she was a character. I'll do it myself, she said.
Well, and I think too, a lot of times, when you have those special memories and you're like bonding over these law shows,
Hmm.
and I think that does create something in you, that it creates a desire, that,
Yeah.
hey, this might be something that I I might be good at it.
Yeah.
I might want to do this.
Right.
So, but
I'm a big believer in breadcrumbs. I'm a big, big believer that starting from very young ages, people will call things out in us, even if you can't even understand what sense they make at the time. Like, I remember being in like third or fourth grade, and it was one of the gifted program days. We were, for one day a week, they would pull us all out, the seven of us, off to a different classroom for the day. And the teacher in the gifted program said, had us read in a circle. And when I went, she was like, wow, Mary's really good at reading aloud. And I was like, amazing. What am I going to do with that? And fast forward 30, 40 years, whatever it was. And I do podcasts and I read
yeah.
audiobooks, and, speak from a stage or whatever. So don't dismiss the things people called out in you when you were little.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I love that so, so much. So I want to talk about a few things that are in your book, your new book, where you talk about flipping the script on
Mm-hmm.
fear and the way that you should reframe fear. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. So a big, just for everybody listening at home who hasn't gotten to see the book yet, a big premise of the book is that fear is a really boring liar, and the same broken scripts it uses on you, Carol, it also uses on me. The same ones it uses on me, it also uses on you and our friends listening at home. And the way that kind of first came to me was as you know, I coach a lot of women who want to write books or do courses or, speak from the stage. And I just had gone through a streak where I was really noticing that each of the women I was coaching was getting hit with like the same basic, like almost like word for word scripts of fear. And at the like most predictable times in their journey. So like if they just signed on to like take a major step forward in making progress on the dream, like coming here for a 2-day intensive, it was like and cue existential dread, like almost to the minute. And I was just getting really frustrated at how fear could be so boring and keep so many of us stuck at the same
Mhm.
time. And so I pulled out my phone one day and I just like didn't even really give an introduction to it. I just started rattling it off. I was like, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to. I can't start until I'm perfect. I can't start until it's perfect. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? What if I start and I don't know every step in the blueprint or the staircase? What if I start and I don't have the bandwidth? What if I can't stay consistent with it? What if my voice doesn't even matter? What if I don't even matter? What if it's already too late? And I said, fear is not your friend. Start
Mm,
anyway. Start now.
yeah.
And I just kind of hit send on it and it super took off because it was just so relatable to people. And it was like, yep, you just like checked every box.
Right. Yeah.
And it was really the proof to me, and kind of like the foundation, I guess, or the precursor to this other, that I joke in the book, like there's this moment that every writer lives for when you feel two dots connect in a way that you've never quite seen them connected before. You're like somewhere in the recesses of your limbic brain, these two dots find each other. And the epiphany moment was, what if fear attacks creatives in particular because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all, right? It is not connected to muse or melody or the force of all creation, short of being able to throw its voice so that it sounds like you, because if it didn't, you could catch it much faster,
Yeah.
and being able to shapeshift into all these different characters. It doesn't really have any inherent gifts at all.
Mm,
And so it spends its days jealous of those of us we were made in the image of a creator.
mhm.
So we are inherently creative and we were given these specific talents for a specific good work prepared for us in advance. And fear is jealous that it does not have that kind of purpose in its life. The only thing it can do is attack those of us who were.
Mm.
And I joke in the book, like, it's not really much of a joke, honestly, that fear is not a very creative guy, but he is a busy guy. And
Mm.
like any good productive overachiever, he's learned how to prioritize. So if you're already hiding in plain sight, if you're already playing small, then all you need is a little fear maintenance mode at best, a little sprinkled in self sabotage or perfectionism, and you're all set. But show up and actually start to do work that matters, work that's going to change things, work that actually might help people. And you better expect fear to show up teeth bared and snarling. And I say we can use that weakness. We
Mm.
can use every bit of fear's boring, unoriginal, predictable behavior to predict when we're on the right track. Because if the work you're about to do didn't matter, fear wouldn't bother with you.
Yeah.
And so the way we flip that script is fear just showed up. Good. It must mean I actually care about what I'm about to put into the world. I must actually believe it's going to help people.
Yeah, that's really good. So, how did you, I mean, first of all, did you ever practice law after you graduated from Yale Law School?
I did not. Well, I did my summer internships at law firms in London and New York, and I had offers from both of them to
Wow.
start full time after I graduated, but we turned them down to start the photography business.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
kind of.
Yeah.
It worked out. It worked out. Spoiler alert, it worked out.
But it looks like you have, I mean, I don't know how much fear. It seems like reading your book that you did experience a lot of this fear too, that the
Yes,
ladies that you coach had. So, how
100%.
did, yeah, how did you overcome that fear in your own life in order
Mm,
to do the thing?
yeah. There's a two-part answer to that. The first part is I felt all of the fear, but I allowed myself to harness other people's doubts or my perception of other people treating me like I didn't matter or that I wasn't going to be the one, or just feeling like the underdog. I used every perceived slight I could find to try to turn it into jet fuel. One of my favorite parts in the book is in chapter 1. And we have actually, for everybody listening, for all of your listeners, Carol, we have we have put up at namethefear.com. If they go there right now, for your listeners, we have the whole first chapter up there free that they can
Okay.
download and start reading right away. So that's at
Yeah.
namethefear.com. You can also check out the all the rest of the book. And so, like I was saying, one of my favorite parts of the book is in that chapter 1, and it's talking about like for all of us, the voices of other people have blurred and bled, at once auto-tuned and amplified in our heads until they've become the singular voice of reason. Every single day, that voice of reason tells us it would be safer not to show up. For
Yeah.
some of us, the weight of that doubt freezes us right where we are. We
Yeah.
decide to never again move forward, never risk falling on our face in front of everybody. It keeps us stuck. Those are the in fear maintenance mode people at best. For others of us, though, this is my favorite part. In a true Jeff Goldblum worthy life finds a way, adapt or find yourself extinct moment of clarity, we take those petrified doubts, inject them with every ounce of survival wired right into our DNA, and hatch an entirely different species of success altogether. We
Mm.
take their doubts and we wear them, we take them underestimating us and we wear it like an eternal badge of honor. Now we are the keepers of every perceived slight, the we are the ones, the oracles of the uninvited, the patron saints of the underdogs. For those of us among the sacred order of the underestimated, we learned how to take this rotting backyard piles of rejection in the corners of our mind and turn it into jet fuel. You know, we collected it up for use as an accelerant of explosive proportions sometime in the future.
Mm.
So that's the first part of the answer. That's what I did. Every perceived slight I could grab onto, every person I felt like was not, giving me my due, every person who was overlooking me, every time I was uninvited, every time I had one teacher, I had a lot of amazing teachers, but I had one teacher who said to me, if anybody's going to make it out of Richwood, West Virginia, it is not going to be you.
Oh, wow.
Put it in
Fuel
my
on the
back pocket.
fire. Yeah.
Let's go. It's jet fuel. And I used that for years and years. Like, we started a photography business after I went to Yale, and all the people who said, oh, the golden girl has fallen from grace.
Oh.
Oh, all that schooling, not so fancy now. Put it in my back pocket. We're not just going to build a business, we're going to build the business. We're going to climb all the
Oh.
way to the top. So I used that for years. And something I talk about as we near sort of the end of the book is like, that is not a sustainable form of jet fuel. It's an effective form of jet fuel. It will get the job done. It will
Mhm.
give you that boost forward. But if we're talking about doing a lifetime of climbing this mountain. That's a running metaphor in the book, pushing a boulder up the mountain. A lifetime of purpose, a lifetime of doing the work we were put here to do, a lifetime of building things that last, we're going to need a much more sustainable fuel. And so the second part of the answer is, if I'm not doing it to win or prove people wrong or, collect gold stars and brand name labels like a backfill to fill the hole in my heart, then what does make me get up every day and work for the work that was prepared for me like I'm working for the Lord?
Mhm.
I worked on this book for 12 hours a day for 12 months straight. And there were
Wow.
plenty of days when I wanted to quit, plenty of days I wanted to quit. But I remembered the face I held in front of me of this like target avatar reader, this generation changer, this hard story person who's come so far, but they just keep dropping the boulder at the last minute. They keep running up against a brick wall. They keep playing small and shrinking themselves back down into the tiny containers they believe they belong in. And
Mm.
they just keep starting over. And what would happen if that person got set free from the icy grip of fear in their lives? And that becomes a much more sustainable fuel source. So, not such a good fuel source for the last 20 years, but the last, couple of years, it's switched more into what does it look like to show up with purpose?
Yeah, that is really good. And that's a good point. Our motivation matters. If we're
Yes.
just going after, I'm going to prove them wrong, then that's not going to sustain the whatever it is we're trying to do, whether it's, being a good mom or a wife, if we're going to prove somebody wrong, but
Mm,
we've got to have that motivation to know that, hey, this is the reason that I want to do this. But I think a lot of times when you were saying that, perfectionism came to mind
yeah.
because I think women, especially, have
Mm,
this whole thing around perfectionism. And when I was reading that in your book, I was like, yes, this is so true because we feel like we cannot even step out. We can't do the thing, whatever the thing may be, being the room mom in your kid's elementary school class or stepping up and, teaching a Sunday school class at church or whatever it might be. We always, or a lot of times, women, we kind of hang back and think, I just don't know how to do that well.
yeah.
And it has to be perfect before I can
Mm.
start. So, can you address that?
Oh,
That's a
yeah.
big one. Yeah.
No, I'm just making that face because I know that. I know that feeling, that feeling. I put off writing a book for years because I like genuinely, no hyperbole included, believed that the way that publishing a book worked is that you submitted a manuscript that was 100% finished, start to finish. You sat down and somehow knew how to write it, start to
Yeah.
finish. You didn't like move it around at all. It just sort of poured out of you
It's
like
just
some sort of
right.
immaculate, divination or whatever. And you sent it to publishers and they either said yes or no. And if they said no, that was it. Like you were done. You never got to try again. You had like Eminem style, one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. Okay. And that's how I thought you wrote a book. I did not know that for nonfiction in particular, you only need a few chapters, that those chapters might change dramatically from the proposal to the finished product. And that you get drafts and drafts and drafts. You get to make it better if you need to.
Yeah.
And so I just like when I explain that now and knowing what I know about the publishing world now, it seems so ridiculous. Like, how did we ever get that idea in our head? But what do you hear? You hear J.K. Rowling sent her book out 42 times before
Yeah.
somebody picked it up or whatever, the different books that took a long time. And so we get this vision in our head that if we get one no, then we're done.
Mm.
And that was not my story when it finally did come time to pitch. We got offers from a bunch of publishers, and like I said, like I ended up signing for 5 books with the publisher I went with. But it took me 40 years to do it because I thought it had to be perfect before I could start.
Yeah.
So, chapter 10 in the book. So, for everybody listening, it's premised on that idea we talked about earlier, fear's a really boring liar. And then, chapter by chapter, I go toe to toe with all these different faces of fear that it likes to put on: procrastination, people pleasing, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, second guessing, self sabotage, not enough, overthinking, criticism, distractions, failure, and even success. 14 of them in total. And then each chapter has a bunch of mini fears that we talk about in there. And chapter 10 is one of my favorite chapters, one of my favorite titled chapters for sure. It is Perfectionism is Hiding with better PR. So
Yeah.
I kind of like to think of hiding as like cauliflower, you know? It's like nobody liked cauliflower for the longest time. And then it
I
hired a
still
new
don't. Yeah.
marketing team, and suddenly we're having like cauliflower pizza and cauliflower rice, and like we're pretending cauliflower is amazing. Brussels sprouts had a similar renaissance, right?
Yeah.
Good marketing can really change things. And so what if hiding kind of hired this Mad Men, Don Draper worthy marketing team to say, we need something that feels a lot more palatable. It almost feels like a humble brag. It almost feels like a virtue. Oh, I
Oh.
haven't put that out there yet because I'm just such a perfectionist. I know this is taking longer, but I'm really into every single detail. I'm just such a perfectionist. Oh, to be one of the, little people who are perfectly fine phoning in a C minus performance, but like those of us who are high achievers and A plus plus people, the perfectionists among us understand it's just going to take a while. And it's like, that's a lot more fun to say than I'm just afraid it's not any good.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
afraid I'm going to be criticized. I'm afraid I'm going to be embarrassed. I'm afraid it's not going to work out.
Hmm.
Or I'm afraid I'm going to say this thing and then I'm going to actually have to do something about it.
Yeah.
So, what if perfectionism is hiding with better PR? And so we use that in a million different ways, like you were just talking about, from writing the books, speaking on the stages, all the way to raising your hand to show up and do something at your kid's school.
Yeah.
We say, oh, I'll push somebody else into the spotlight.
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
hide here in plain sight because I know if I did it, I'd be such a perfectionist about it.
Yeah.
Or, or you're afraid, and we're
Mhm.
all afraid, but
Yeah.
we're going to feel the fear, name the fear, and move forward anyway.
Yeah. That is really good. And something that goes, I feel, I mean, you mentioned it just now, but something that I really struggle with is procrastination. I
Yeah.
mean, that is good grief. If I could overcome that, I could conquer the world, literally.
Yeah.
But it's just, oh, I just struggle with that so much. Can you share, like, what are some ways we can overcome that procrastination?
Mm. I think a really good place to start. So, chapter 8 is procrastination is a double edged sword. And I think a really good place to start is by asking ourselves what it is that we're actually afraid of.
Mm,
And for me, and I know a lot of people listening, the fear that keeps me procrastinating is that I am afraid that no matter what I do, it will never be as good as I want it to be.
mhm.
And so I told you the title of that chapter is a double-edged sword. Part of the reason I called it that, there's a lot of different dualities we go through in that chapter: adaptive versus passive procrastination. Active versus passive procrastination, adaptive versus non-adaptive procrastination, parasympathetic nervous system versus sympathetic nervous system procrastination. We go deep into
Yes, you
procrastination.
do.
Well, ironically, I did not procrastinate on writing the procrastination chapter. And so I say, what I do is that I use procrastination as a double-edged cop-out.
Mm.
If I get it down to the wire, I talk in the book many times about the book
Yeah.
kicks off with me turning in
Oh
a
my,
paper with 23 seconds left in the class.
I know.
Woof. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Did you
are
feel
the
your face getting
queen.
red?
Yeah, I mean, and then I was just, reading about your economics class and how you only
Mhm.
showed up for the 4 required tests, and
Yeah.
yet you aced every one, but
Yeah.
you had to cram it all in there at the last minute to get it
That's right.
in?
That's right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So I say, I love the terror. I'm made best friends with the terror, and I describe the terror as that moment when, kind of like vampire venom in a wildly popular YA novel, this crystallizing clarity finally shoots through your veins. Like you finally reach that point where you're like, oh, I might not be able to pull it off at the last minute. I
Mhm.
might get the F this time. And then suddenly, like your every neuron is firing, like you're limitless or whatever. And so, I talk in the book about how for me it's become this double edged cop out, where if I put it off to the last minute and I do it and I get, say, an A minus or just an A instead of an A plus, I can always go think about how much better it would have been if I'd had more time. Like
Mm.
I'm never bumping up against the edge and outer limits of my abilities. There's
Yeah.
always more there that could have been possible. I just didn't have the time this time.
Mm.
And on the other end of the spectrum, if I don't pull it off and I do for the first time in my life fail, I always have this fail safe break in case of emergency in my back pocket of, well, I'm not a person who fails. I was just up against impossible
Mm.
circumstances this time.
Yeah.
And there's this one part in the book that just felt really like I was stepping on my own toes. It's like none of us want to sit down and be given all of the time in the world that we need to have written our fullest and best effort and then be graded accurately on that effort. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
We all want those kinds of um, gaps in our mind where we can go, I bet I could have done better. I bet I could have done more. I bet,
Right.
and so the terror, the fear that we're dealing with, the pain that keeps our brain procrastinating, it keeps us giving us little like dopamine hits of reward for avoiding the work, avoiding the pain. What we're afraid of is that same fear we talked about with perfectionism. What if I don't actually have what it takes? What if
Mm.
I sit down and I use all the time allotted and I write the best possible book I can and still it doesn't do very well?
Mhm.
If I do it crunched to the last minute, I can say, well, the next one will be better.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's why we do it. That's one big reason why we do it. We're really at its most basic, it's we're avoiding some sort of pain.
yeah.
And in the book, we talk about the way that you break that is by actually noticing the pain that procrastinating causes you.
Mm.
We get your brain more information, that procrastinating is not all it's cracked up to be either. That's actually a pretty terrible existence as well.
It is.
And there are parts in that chapter where I talk about I feel horrible when I procrastinate. And by that, I
Yeah,
don't mean that I feel bad for procrastinating. I mean I actually feel physically horrible.
yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Well, that's good because there's several things like as far as um, the podcast and ministry goes that I am procrastinating at, but there are also two rooms in my home that are completely filled with that I need to declutter. And I'm like, why? Why am I just not? Why can't I just go in there and do it? And
Mm,
when you talk about the fear, it's like, because I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to put it or,
yeah,
do I get rid of it or should I keep, there's all these questions that you just keep asking yourself.
yeah,
And I think it's the same if you're writing a book or, whatever it is
yeah.
that you're putting off, that you're just not going to be able to answer those questions well.
And I would kind of add to that, maybe just throwing it into the mix. Like maybe there's even a fear, but or like a pain beneath that pain. I
Mm-hmm.
know for me, this is true when I need to go through like a closet of like, I'm going to have to deal with the emotional baggage of like, why did I spend money on that thing and
Yeah.
then not use it? Or why did I buy that thing thinking I would fit into it in 6 months and I still
Oh
don't, or
gosh.
whatever,
That is
or why did I
painful.
buy that thing pretending to be like somebody else, but is not actually my style? Like there's a lot of emotional baggage to unpack when we go through our things. And so our brain's like, nope, that does not sound like
I'm
fun
not
at
doing
all.
that. Yeah. That's it.
Cleaning out this junk drawer or like, writing something on our to-do list we've already done and marking it off sounds like way more fun. So let's do that.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And even so my husband's parents were both only children and his grandparents, one was born in 1896, the other one was born in 1901, and the others were born in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And so when they passed away, my mother and father-in-law, my mother-in-law especially, didn't throw away anything. And so going through that house, and we have one bay in our garage that is what's left. And it's just like, ah, it's so hard. It's just so
Mhm.
hard. We just,
Yeah.
that's the unspoken thing that my husband and I are like, we got to get rid of it. We got to go through it. But it's
Yeah.
when you're the last people that
Mm,
get this, there is such an emotional, it's an emotional weight of trying to figure it out.
yeah.
So, yeah, procrastination is a big, big deal. But I know when
Mm,
you do it, gosh, it gives you so much freedom. Like,
yeah.
hey, I don't have to worry about that's not in the back of my mind all the time anymore because I
Right.
did it. It's over with. It's
Yeah,
over
and
with.
we really underestimate, haha, underestimate how much mental bandwidth clutter
Yeah.
takes up, or just like loops that are not closed, tasks
Hmm.
that are not crossed off. Like it's like our brain is the RAM constantly like recycling. Like remember, you've got to go do that thing, and
Yeah.
as soon as you just get it done, it frees up so much creative bandwidth to do the truly deep, big work you really were put here to do. So I feel that. I feel all that.
I haven't thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess it would create space for the creative
Yeah.
thinking. So that, and as we're talking about that, so one of the things that you talk about in your book is that overthinking
Yeah.
is exhausting, and you
Yeah.
said it's really a science.
Hmm.
So can you explain that?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. Something that I discovered in researching that chapter that I just found so wildly fascinating is it's called Bayesian brain theory, or more commonly, it's referred to as predictive brain theory. And in its simplest terms, it means that your brain is an incredible prediction machine. Like, take this bad boy to Vegas. Like, it can like churn out Vegas odds on like
Wow.
what is going to be likely to happen. And so it's an incredible prediction machine. It knows whether or not you will succeed at something before you even start. And it's basing that on all of the like prior data that it has, like based on every experience you've had, every rule your prefrontal cortex has created, every data point you already have, every piece of knowledge you already have. It can look at something like write a book and go, oof, we're not going to be able to do that. And so your brain, to sort of self protect from that, will actually like shift you into more low cost, pretty quick reward, instant gratification kind of
Yeah.
activities, because you're going to be much more likely to be able to do them. And so the power of this is that your brain will course correct and update constantly based on new data, based on new experiences. And so the way you get your brain to stop self-sabotaging you out of doing every hard thing, because it's like, no, you're not going to be able to do that, forget it,
Yeah.
do something easier, is you start to show up and do hard things. Little in the beginning, but then bigger and bigger and bigger. And now you're giving all these new data points and a sort of muscle memory and a track record for doing hard things your brain can draw from. So it'll be less likely to divert your attention away from the task at hand. So that's kind of like the cool overarching filter.
Yeah.
And then kind of getting a little more into the specifics of why we feel so exhausted when we overthink is because when you are thinking that hard, you're really kind of getting stuck in the prefrontal cortex, which is the problem solving part of center of your brain.
Hmm.
And if you've ever had writer's block, for example, and it feels like you need to sneeze through your forehead, like that's all the existential angst in the world is like right up here behind your forehead, and you just feel like completely like blocked up. In the book I kind of joke that I imagine the little prefrontal cortex with like white gloves and white shoes like the red M&M being like
Yeah.
like just having a full meltdown temper tantrum. The more we force ourselves to stay, like the more we try to think our way through the problem with the same thinking that got us into the problem,
Hmm.
the more that prefrontal cortex will sort of lock up like that. And when you are thinking that hard, there is both mental fatigue and also physical signs of fatigue, like pupil dilation. Scientists have noted, but specifically, it is a toxic buildup of a compound called glutamate in your prefrontal cortex that your brain will actually make you shift into these instant gratification, really easy tasks. Not because it just wants the dopamine reward, but because it's actually like critical to preserving brain function. Like you're reaching
Oh.
toxic, scary levels of glutamate buildup, and it has to shift you out of that, to keep from there being damage to your neurons, basically. And so there's a reason why when the prefrontal cortex can kind of relax, what's called our limbic brain, which is more of the creative center. There's studies that say all the parts are used for creativity, but that's where creativity really comes alive, is in the limbic brain. It only turns on when the prefrontal cortex turns off. And so if you've ever gotten your best ideas in the shower
Yes.
or on a long walk, my friend Allie Fallon, I share a lot of a big quote from her book, The Power of Writing It Down. And she says, she said this to me on a podcast episode, when you think limbic, think limbs. Go on a walk, that left right action of your feet helps you sort of shift out of prefrontal cortex and into the limbic part. It helps your nervous system calm down. The stretching, whether you're doing like yoga or whatever stretching you subscribe to, whatever. Walking, dancing. I have dance parties in my living room all the time when I'm writing. When you think limbic, think limbs. And so we get loose, we get moving, and without fail, that idea pops in your head. And so very famous authors like Walt Whitman was pretty famous for this. Like the afternoon walk was a major part of his writing practice, because that's where sort of all the percolation and um, there's a word I'm trying to think of where it's like the incubation,
Hmm.
that all sort of happens when there's this part of your brain that you're not even really aware of that's connecting dots from things you saw years ago to things you saw yesterday in brand new and innovative ways. It's called conceptual blending in the literature, and it only happens when you let your brain wander and rest.
Wow.
Yeah.
That reminds me like in high school when you'd sit down and you'd work a math problem and you just oh, you would just get so deep into it and you couldn't figure it out. And then you'd say, I've just got to take a break. And you walk
Mhm.
away and you do something else for a while. And then you come back and you look at it and you're like, "Ah, well, gosh, why didn't I see that?" And you
Yes,
figure it out.
exactly. Or like when you're just about to fall asleep, or when you've just, like, you
Oh,
wake up and it's like while you were sleeping, your subconscious was like, let me work on this. I got this.
yeah,
And then
that's
it's
right.
it's obvious what to do. Yeah.
I
100%.
have gotten some of my best ideas when I've woken up in the
Mhm.
morning and all of a sudden all this download starts coming in,
Right?
and I probably shouldn't, but I keep my phone next to my bed and I have my
Mm,
notes app.
that's right.
And like I remember one morning I sat there for an hour and a half writing all the notes that were
Yeah.
downloaded. So and I know a lot of people say they keep like a notebook next to their bed so that they can write that down. And
Hmm.
because you don't, once you get up,
Yep.
you lose it.
Yeah.
You cannot capture those thoughts again because I have
Hmm.
tried and that it just doesn't work.
So
So,
that's actually like a state in your brain right when you're about to fall asleep or right when you're waking up. It's called theta. And so there's somebody, I want to say it was Albert Einstein, would just take a lot of mini naps because it had kept him in more states of theta, about to fall asleep or had just woken up,
really?
where a lot of that really innovative, creative problem, like I don't even want to say problem solving because that's so much the prefrontal cortex, but I mean problem
Right.
solving like color coding and like sorting into categories and like keeping your to-do list and making you show up places on time. Like true innovative problem solving when there isn't some paint by numbers blueprint for you to go follow, when it's like you're going to actually have to figure out how to do this on your own a little bit rather than following somebody else's best laid plans they lay out perfectly for you.
Right.
That's going to require more of that creative part of your brain.
Yeah. I love that. I'm so glad we talked about that. That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
And I know, so I was in a writers group, and one thing that a girl discovered is there's actually um, like a I can't think of the word. Something that you can hang on your shower wall that is
Mm.
like a waterproof
Oh
has a
yeah.
pin. And
Yes.
so because they were like, "Gosh, I always get my best ideas in the shower, but then I don't
Same.
want to lose them." So that is exactly what you're saying, and
Yeah.
it's been proven, obviously. So
Hmm. Yep. It is not just you if you're listening. It's not
yeah,
just you if your shower best ideas come in the shower. There's
that's right.
science.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So one of the last things I want to ask you about is, so we talked about having that motivation that kept you going, which was like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to prove them wrong. But then you also say that proving people wrong is a powder keg, and how can
Hmm.
success and showing your worth blow up in your face?
Yeah. Oof. Yeah. So we talked about in chapter one, I already talked about that section of, the hot, rotting piles of rejection and turning it into jet fuel, this explosive accelerant we store up for future use. Well, so there are so many very cool full circle moments that happen in this book. And for everybody listening, if you want to write a book, there are books and there are ideas. And this has been my experience with all three books. The idea will tell you what it wants to be.
Mm,
Like Liz Gilbert sort of talks about it, ideas tapping people on the shoulder, walking around in the world trying to find somebody to enter into a handshake agreement with, and we need to be paying attention enough to get the handshake. And when I started writing this book, I thought it was going to be 100% about proving other people wrong. And when other people discount us or look right through us or overlook us or don't invite us or all those things. And that's in this book. Trust me,
mhm.
it's in this
Yeah,
book.
yeah, it
That's
is.
a real thing. That's a
Yeah.
real thing. But it turns out about 80% of the book is when we do it to ourselves. And when we do it to ourselves, like I was describing earlier, we're kind of holding on to anything we can use as a perceived slight or a very real slight to prove people wrong. It's this accelerant of explosive proportions. And so in the full circle moment, which when the idea told me about this and I didn't know it was coming, it was like, what? How is this happening? So in that section, in the very last chapter, I talk about the sugar factory that exploded in Georgia in like 2007, 2008. A lot of people died. A lot of people were really badly burned. And when they kind of gave the debrief of what happened, the CEO said that in the refineries, in the silos, the powdered sugar, the sugar dust had settled in the basement and that they hadn't been doing the housekeeping to clean all that junk up. And so the slightest spark, that sugar acted like gunpowder. It turned into a powder keg. And Carol, I share two excerpts from Dirt and Slow Growth because I've been kind of lovingly referring to Underestimated as like the textbook explanation of why I am the way I am in
Yeah,
Dirt,
yeah.
you know, and why we are the way we are, why we hard story people and underdogs and underestimated people act this way. And so I share the first excerpt from Dirt where I'm talking about being at Yale and still feeling like I have a hole in my heart the size of a chest wound. It's like a root canal. When the air hits just right, it sends all these exposed roots screaming in their wake. And I tried to backfill it with gold stars and brand name labels and, degrees and achievements and accolades. And it should not be surprising to me that in the years to come, it was an extraction, not a filling that I needed most. And then I pair that with an excerpt from Slow Growth where I say, will I ever matter? You might be shocked to find out how many times those words have spilled from my lips. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to disappear altogether, dematerialize, a billion atomized molecules floating on the roaring void. And so when you combine those two together, in Dirt, I talked about that backfill being sort of like a Pez dispenser doling out the sugary sweet hits of rewards. Just keep the candy coming, God. Who cares if I'm anemic? Who cares, how weak my faith has become? Just keep the candy coming. And so the candy, no matter how much of it I got, turns into a billion atomized molecules floating on the void like sugar dust.
Mm.
And I wasn't doing the housekeeping to clean all that up. And so it became this, powder keg, you burn yourself out from the inside out, this hollowed, burned out shell of yourself, using this jet fuel that is sure effective but not sustainable to prove other people wrong.
Yeah.
And we're going to need something much more renewable if we're going to go the distance. And that's when we get into like purpose and the difference between success and significance. And there's just running metaphors. I'm not going to totally give it away because it's one of my favorite parts, but there's running metaphors of pushing the boulder up the mountain and dropping it at the last minute, right? Feeling like you're starting over, and balking at the ledge the next time the leap comes around. Like you leap the first time, but will you leap again?
Mm-hmm.
And those two metaphors collide in an incredibly powerful way at the very end of the book when we talk about the difference between the survival to success loop and the leap from success to true significance.
Mm. Yeah, because there is a difference between success and significance.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that
Mm-hmm.
because you can be successful and people may not people may not understand, the significance of your significance. And, as a Christian, like I'm created in the image of God, and that is
Mm-hmm.
my significance. That is my identity.
Yeah.
But until we get to that point, until we understand that, we don't trust ourselves. We can't we don't feel like we can do the thing that
Mm.
whatever it is that God's asking us to do. And
Yes.
some of it is some big scary stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
when we understand that, hey, God's in our corner and He created us for a purpose,
Yeah.
that if we find our significance there, then even though we fail, even though it may not come to fruition, whatever it is that we're working on, it's going to be okay because God's
Mm.
got it.
That's right.
He's got us. So,
Yeah, what that makes me think of is this is not explicitly in the book, but it is a conversation I knew I wanted to have when I was doing the podcast around it. And that is sort of the difference between capital T trust and little t trust.
mm,
Capital T, this being a faith show, capital T trust for us is where our ultimate hope goes.
hmm,
Who we ultimately trust with our lives and the outcomes and the plan for our life and the work we are being called to, all of that, capital T trust. But there's also a very real thing called little t trust that I'm going to call like self trust. And Christians get real uncomfortable when we say self trust or self help. Oh, I can't help myself. I can't trust myself. I can only trust God.
yeah,
No, I'm talking about self trust in the form of stewardship.
mm,
I'm talking about our capacity for what we believe we can steward well, which means to actually hold space for and respond to with wisdom as we navigate it with obedience, right? We're going to go where we're being called. And in my experience, sometimes people get stuck playing small and not moving forward because they have big T trust. They don't trust God to come through.
mm,
Most of the time, it's little T trust. They believe God is who He says He is, but they believe they will be the ones to mess it up.
mm.
And
Oh
that's
my
what keeps us
gosh.
stuck. And that's
Yeah.
chapter 3 about capacity and self-sabotage as a shot glass, which is not about alcohol really at all. It's about the tiny containers we believe we belong in and
Yeah.
what we trust ourselves to hold. And if we only think we can hold a shot glass worth of talents or responsibilities or where the higher places we're being called, we'll shrink back into that every time.
Mm.
So that's just something I think like to kind of leave there at the end is like this is a book about how do we expand our capacity for stewardship. How do
Yeah.
we expand our capacity to trust ourselves to be, like Dr. Allison Cook said to me, there is a grown up in the room who can be trusted. That grown up is you.
Yeah.
And for those of us with a hard story who something happened in our story that said it's not safe to trust anybody, including ourselves,
Yeah.
that is a revelation in and of itself.
Yeah. And I love that when you said there is a grown up in the room and it's you.
Yeah.
That is, that was like a real revelation when I read that.
Yeah.
That's so
It
good.
was a revelation when she said it to me in that podcast
Yeah.
episode, and I cried my eyes out with revelation.
It's amazing how just one little phrase can just,
Mm,
pinpoint that one spot.
yeah.
So this has been a great conversation. I have really
Yes.
enjoyed this, Mary,
Me too.
and I am hoping that the listener will go and purchase your new book and your other books, but especially Dirt.
Yeah.
And I read the
Dirt
yeah,
and underestimated are, I've been calling them kind of like fraternal twins. Like they really
okay.
do go together.
Well,
Yes.
that does make sense because it
Yeah.
explains a lot of who the girl was
That's right.
trailer. So I think that's really good. But so how can our listeners find out more about you and about the
Yeah.
book and tell us again where to get the chapter, the first free chapter?
Yeah, so two places I'll point people. The first is I introduce these characters in Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, actually, but we carry them over into Underestimated, the five achiever types. And in Underestimated, we talk about how they get stuck playing small.
Mhm.
And so we have our performer who's always on their toes, needs to show not just themselves, but everybody else how far they've come. I am a performer. The tightrope walker who could care less who else is clapping, but they need higher and higher death defying feats to feel the same amount of good. The masquerader who hides in plain sight and pushes somebody else into the spotlight in the name of being humble, a sort of false humility. The contortionist is our classic people pleaser. They contort because it is easier than to be criticized. And the illusionist in the distance who believes that until all the conditions to begin and they themselves are perfect, they can't even start. And so if you go to achieverquiz.com, it takes like 2 minutes to take the quiz. There's 10 questions, 10 minutes if you really overthink it. The questions are super easy and lighthearted and fun. And in true Mary fashion, the results go very deep. We so
Yes, they
lighthearted on the
do.
questions,
Yeah.
deep on the results. I will tell you how each type, how your type gets stuck playing small, gets tripped up, and how we break out of that and move forward. And so that's achieverquiz.com. And then namethefear.com is where you're going to find that free chapter I talked about. You can read all of the endorsements for the book. We have some incredible endorsements. John
Mhm.
Acuff, Stephen Pressfield, Christy Wright, Sharon McMahon is writing the foreword. And if while you are there grabbing the free chapter you can read today, pre-orders are the biggest way
Yeah.
you can support an author you love. If you listen to this episode and it really spoke to you and you're like, I wish there was more I could do to help get this book out there,
Yeah.
pre-orders are it. Pre-orders are the 100% way, whether Amazon decides to show it to more people, whether stores decide to stock it on the shelves. And so
Yeah.
if you pre-order, we have the first 3 chapters available for you, and even more importantly, the audiobook. So
Oh,
when the
yeah.
audiobook comes out, when the book releases, you'll get that as well. And it's kind of like getting 2 books for the price of one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I read the audiobook. So if you've enjoyed this episode,
Yes.
you'll love that. So all of that's at namethefear.com. And then I'm at Mary Marantz on Instagram. Go take the quiz. Come tell me what type you got. Tell me if you pre-ordered the book, if you liked the episode, how great Carol is. Just tell me all the things. And that's MaryMarantz.
And when does the book come out again?
Yeah, April 29th.
April 29th. Okay, so everybody go ahead and pre-order so that everybody can be ready and have the books in stock.
Yeah,
And I wish you the best for this. I wish
thank you.
your whole business and ministry the best because you are doing a good work out there helping women to step into what their callings are
Yeah,
and making a difference in the world with their, as you say, muddy stories.
that's right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.